There was a time when the Earth itself turned against its own species. Between 26,000 and 19,000 years ago, the world plunged into an icy abyss so ruthless it nearly erased the human story. From genetic records, scientists have traced a horrifying truth. Out of countless Paleolithic bloodlines, only a handful survived. 99.9% of all human threads were cut, leaving a genetic bottleneck so severe it nearly ended our entire species. This was the crucible of the Last Glacial Maximum, where nature, predators, disease, and our own violence conspired to crush us. The era with a 0.1% chance of survival. And yet, against every rational prediction, someone made it through. And from those few survivors, the rest of us were born. Chapter 1. Climate's Ruthless Whiplash. At the peak of the Last Glacial Maximum, around 26,500 years ago, the Earth became a merciless executioner. Global temperatures plummeted by up to 10 degrees Celsius compared to modern averages, unleashing a cascade of consequences that reshaped the face of the planet. Towering ice sheets, some more than 3 kilometers thick, swallowed entire regions of North America, Scandinavia, and Northern Asia. In Europe, the ice advanced as far south as modern Germany, creating an unbroken wall of white that forced all life to retreat or die. Sea levels dropped by as much as 120 meters, exposing vast plains like Doggerland between Britain and continental Europe, but these new lands were no refuge. They were bitter, treeless, swept by hurricane-force winds and storms of bone-dry dust. Scientists reconstructing this era through ice cores and ocean sediments have found evidence of a global climate system in chaos. Analysis of Greenland ice cores shows that within as little as a decade, temperatures could swing dramatically, plunging human communities into sudden freeze events with no warning. Pollen studies from ancient lake beds across Europe confirm entire plant communities collapsing and shifting, leaving people with no reliable food sources. In places where hunting had been abundant, herds of reindeer, horse, and bison migrated hundreds of kilometers away, or vanished completely. Some species, like the giant woolly rhinoceros, were pushed to extinction by the advancing cold. Rainfall patterns went haywire. The summer monsoons that had nourished the Near East faltered, and regions like the Levant, once home to lush grasslands, became semi-arid wastelands. In Central Asia, dune fields expanded, smothering river valleys in drifting sand. Archaeological digs from southern France to Ukraine reveal abandoned hearths and tools buried beneath layers of windblown silt, silent testimony to communities forced to flee. There are even cut-marked bones left behind in the rush, evidence that these people tried to salvage every scrap of meat as their world collapsed around them. For those who remained, survival was little more than gambling against extinction. Even the best adapted hunter-gatherers, skilled in tracking and shelter building, were caught off guard by the climate's ruthless whiplash. Ancestral patterns that once guided their migrations and seasonal hunts became worthless in a matter of years. When winters refused to end, when lakes turned to lifeless basins, there was nowhere left to run. Fossilized pollen records confirm forests retreating thousands of kilometers, turning vast areas into open tundra where firewood was nearly impossible to find. Starvation was not a question of if, but when. In this gauntlet of cold, drought, and chaos, genetic studies have revealed a stunning truth. Human populations in Europe and Asia shrank to a shadow of their former numbers, reduced to isolated pockets, each barely clinging on. Some estimates suggest certain regions lost over 90% of their inhabitants within a few centuries. This is why scientists see a genetic bottleneck, a near erasure of entire lineages stamped into our DNA. The Last Glacial Maximum was not just a cold spell, it was a planetary purge, a cataclysm that left only the strongest, luckiest, and best adapted to carry the human story forward. Chapter 2. The Poisoned Earth. As if the ice and wind were not enough, the very land beneath Paleolithic feet became a hidden killer. In a world stripped bare by glaciers and drought, the survivors had no choice but to forage in places they barely understood, and the consequences were deadly. around 25,000 years ago, with plant communities shifting wildly. The familiar roots, berries, and leaves humans once depended on were replaced by toxic lookalikes. Some of these contained lethal alkaloids and cyanogenic compounds that could destroy a liver within hours. Ethnobotanists studying modern hunter-gatherers have traced hundreds of cases of plant confusion in ancient populations. The price of a single mistake was death. Fungi posed an even greater threat. As forests retreated, many edible mushrooms vanished, replaced by poisonous relatives. Archaeological analysis of residues on Upper Paleolithic grinding stones from the Czech Republic and southern France suggests that people sometimes processed toxic seeds or fungi, perhaps trying to detoxify them with primitive methods. But there were failures. Traces of carbonized plant remains from hearths and Pavlovian sites show burned seeds of highly toxic species, evidence that entire families may have died from desperate experiments in cooking the inedible. Water, too, turned traitor. As meltwater streams gushed across the barren plains, they picked up minerals from freshly ground rock, saturating rivers and springs with high levels of toxic metals, lead, arsenic, even mercury. In cave sites like Les Azes in southwestern France, sediment cores reveal spikes of these metals precisely during periods when people would have drawn water from local streams. Some isotopic signatures in human bones from the same era show chronic exposure to heavy metals, likely weakening immune systems and making survivors even more vulnerable to disease. As climate whiplash destroyed stable ecosystems, entire animal populations crashed, forcing hungry humans to scavenge meat from unfamiliar prey. Some of these animals carried parasites or biotoxins humans had never faced before. Fossil remains of wild horses and reindeer from the Russian steppe, dated around 23,000 years ago, show parasite eggs embedded in their intestinal tissue, which could easily transfer to humans who undercooked desperate meals. In a world with almost no safety nets, the environment itself seemed engineered to betray the unwary. A simple drink from the wrong stream, a handful of the wrong leaves, one wrongly identified mushroom, these mistakes killed as surely as the wolves in ice. That is why archaeologists now believe the Paleolithic death rate from foodborne toxins and water poisoning was far higher than once assumed. In the poisoned earth of the Last Glacial Maximum, every meal was a calculated risk, and those who miscalculated left no descendants. Chapter 3. The Silent Epidemics. Long before the rise of crowded farming villages and filthy medieval cities, disease was already hunting humans. During the Last Glacial Maximum, parasites and pathogens flourished in ways few modern people can imagine. Excavations of Paleolithic burial sites, from Italy's Pagliacci Cave to the rock shelters of Moravia, have revealed subtle skeletal lesions, hinting at chronic infections. Bone abscesses, joint damage, and periostitis, an inflammation linked to persistent bacterial attack. These marks are quiet signatures of diseases that stalked even the smallest bands of hunter-gatherers. Ancient DNA analysis has shown that some of these pathogens were shockingly familiar. Fragments of bacterial genomes recovered from dental calculus, the hardened plaque on ancient teeth, confirm infections by species of Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and other microbes that still trouble modern hospitals. Unlike later agricultural plagues, these infections didn't require cities. They thrived in cramped caves, on dirty tools, and on poorly cleaned hides. Parasitic worms may have been an even greater danger. Coprolites, fossilized feces from Upper Paleolithic layers in Europe and Asia, show eggs of whipworm and roundworm, parasites that steal nutrition and damage the gut. In a starving population, that could tip the balance from survival to death. These parasites likely co-evolved with Paleolithic humans for hundreds of thousands of years, becoming quiet executioners no spear or club could defeat. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer remains in the Levant have also discovered that tuberculosis, once thought a disease of settled agricultural people, was circulating in humans at least 20,000 years ago. Genetic markers of Mycobacterium tuberculosis lie embedded in the ancient DNA of people who hunted ibex and gazelles on the dry, windswept plains. The evidence suggests tuberculosis may have evolved with humans far earlier than previously believed, hiding in small groups, smoldering across generations. Waterborne killers were everywhere. In a world where safe drinking water was a gamble, diarrheal disease was a constant specter. A single contaminated stream could sweep through a band and kill its youngest and weakest within days. Microscopic parasites such as Giardia and Cryptosporidium likely lurked in animal-contaminated water sources, as they do in remote communities today. But Paleolithic people had no boiling pots, no antibiotics, no knowledge of germ theory. They drank, they died, and the cycle continued. In this harsh world, disease did not wait for civilization to flourish. It was already there, woven into the fabric of human existence. Ancient pathogens left no scars on stone tools, no cave paintings to warn the next generation. They were silent, invisible, and for tens of thousands of years, just as lethal as the fangs of any cave lion. Chapter 4. Apex Hunters in the Night. In the frozen chaos of the last glacial maximum, Paleolithic humans were not alone in their struggle to survive. They shared their shrinking world with predators of terrifying size and power, creatures whose senses were sharpened to hunt anything warm-blooded, including humans. These were not distant mythic beasts. They were real, and they walked the same trails, tracked the same herds, and crept into the same caves where people huddled for warmth. Across Europe and northern Asia, the cave lion Panthera spelaea ruled the open steppes. Larger than modern lions, with massive jaws and the strength to take down a horse or even a bison, they sometimes prowled in family groups, an unstoppable force in a landscape stripped of hiding places. Fossil remains from Chauvet Cave and predator dens in the Swabian Jura reveal human bones gnawed and cracked, suggesting people were sometimes hunted rather than hunters. Then came the cave hyenas, Crocuta spelaea, bone-crushing giants whose packs may have numbered dozens. Their jaws could shatter the femurs of horses with a single bite. Recent isotopic studies of their bones show they competed directly with humans for prey, and in lean times may have turned on the humans themselves. Archaeologists have found cave hyena dung in Paleolithic shelters, a chilling sign that these predators were bold enough to scavenge or attack where humans lived. On the American plains, dire wolves Conistirus roamed in enormous packs, their bones littering the La Brea tar pits by the thousands. With a bite force surpassing any living dog, they could bring down megafauna, and humans were no safer than any prey animal crossing their path. Some models suggest dire wolves coordinated hunts over vast territories, making the chance of a lone human surviving an encounter almost zero. But perhaps the most terrifying of all was the short-faced bear, Arctodus simus. Standing up to 3.5 meters tall and weighing over 900 kilograms, it towered over any human. With legs built for running and an acute sense of smell, it could chase prey for kilometers across open Ice Age grasslands. Its teeth reveal a highly carnivorous diet. There was nowhere to hide if this bear decided you were on the menu. What made these predators so deadly was not only their strength, but their familiarity with humans. For tens of thousands of years, they had learned to track human scent, to sniff out campsites, to exploit weaknesses. Fossils of Paleolithic shelters sometimes show bones dragged away, half-eaten, claw marks still visible on cave walls. In this environment, humans were far from the apex predator. They were one more resource in a brutally efficient food chain. Every night, beyond the thin glow of a Paleolithic fire, something watched, something waited. The apex hunters of the last glacial maximum were perfectly adapted to a world on the edge, and so were their appetites. Chapter 5. Interhuman Violence Beyond Reason. If the ice, the predators, and the poisoned land weren't enough, Paleolithic humans faced their most dangerous enemy in each other. When survival shrinks to a knife edge, cooperation can collapse into slaughter. Archaeological evidence from the last glacial maximum reveals that violence among human groups was not rare, but systematic, and at times horrifying. In a field near Talheim, Germany, a mass grave was unearthed, dating to about 7,000 years ago, but echoing deeper Paleolithic patterns. Dozens of skeletons lay together, their skulls caved in by blows from stone axes. Women, children, the elderly, none were spared. Similar pits at Schoneck-Kilienstetten and Aspern-Schletz in Austria point to organized massacres, carried out with chilling efficiency. These were not random raids, but exterminations, wiping out rival groups to remove them from the competition for food, territory, and even mates. Though these examples come slightly after the LGM, the same conditions likely prevailed throughout the glacial maximum: shrinking resources, desperate populations, and the breakdown of trust between bands. Cut marks on human bones from Gough's Cave in England, dated to around 15,000 years ago, suggest acts of cannibalism, marrow cracked open, skulls modified into drinking vessels. To many archaeologists, these marks are not just signs of starvation, but of ritualized consumption, a grim method of absorbing the power of enemies or honoring the dead in a world with no guarantees. Infanticide also leaves faint but undeniable traces in the record. In times of extreme scarcity, newborns were the least likely to survive, and the archaeological pattern of missing infant burials hints that their deaths were not always from natural causes. Ethnographic parallels in modern hunter-gatherers support the theory that killing infants, while horrific to modern eyes, could have been viewed as a tragic necessity to preserve the rest of the band. In a world where one extra mouth might doom everyone, mercy took on a brutal definition. Weapons recovered from the Upper Paleolithic, backed blades, spear points, even early projectiles, show signs of damage consistent with use against other humans, not animals. Bone points embedded in human skeletons, unearthed in sites from France to Siberia, tell the same dark story. Neighbor turned against neighbor. Anthropologists believe that some groups developed complex alliances to defend scarce resources, while others turned to total annihilation of their rivals. This was not the noble savage of modern fantasy. These were humans stripped to the core, driven by hunger, fear, and an instinct to protect their own bloodline at any cost. The Last Glacial Maximum did not just test their skills against the land. It pitted them against each other in conflicts that rewrote the boundaries of kinship, loyalty, and violence. Chapter 6. The Vanishing Lineages. While a small handful of humans endured, countless others were lost to time forever. The Last Glacial Maximum was not just a test of survival for one species, it was an extinction lottery across the entire human family tree. Fossil and genetic records confirm the collapse of entire hominin lineages during and after this brutal era. The Neanderthals, who had survived across Eurasia for over 300,000 years, vanished by around 40,000 years ago, right on the eve of the cold's most severe grip. Denisovans, a close cousin known from a handful of bones in Siberia, faded into genetic traces soon after. Even within Homo sapiens itself, whole branches of our ancestry were clipped from the tree. Mitochondrial DNA studies show how severely these lineages bottlenecked. One study of modern European gene pools reveals that fewer than 20 maternal lines account for almost everyone alive today in that region, hinting at the staggering loss of families who simply could not outlast the cold, the famine, and the violence. Y chromosome diversity also plummeted, suggesting that many male lineages were erased in a wave of competition, disease, and simple bad luck. Archaeological surveys of caves and temporary shelters from France to Georgia reveal the same grim pattern: settlements abandoned and never reoccupied, tool styles that disappear mid-sequence, art traditions that simply end. These were not gradual transitions, they were cultural extinctions, cut off in a single generation. The people who had made those marks on cave walls, who had sung those songs, were gone. Researchers now see this era as the greatest pruning event in the human story. What survived was not necessarily the smartest, the strongest, or the kindest, but the most adaptable, the most cooperative, and sometimes the most ruthless. Geneticists estimate that by the time the ice began to retreat around 19,000 years ago, our ancestors had been reduced to clusters so small they could have fit within a modern stadium. From those fragile roots, humanity had to rebuild. The vanishing of our closest relatives and entire branches of our own species reminds us how thin the line of survival truly was. We did not stand atop the food chain by destiny. We clawed our way there by the narrowest of margins, leaving behind a graveyard of forgotten families, lost songs, and abandoned dreams. Chapter 7. The 0.1% that endured. In the end, against all odds, A fraction of a fraction survived. The last glacial maximum was a test so merciless that 99.9% of all human lineages were erased, leaving behind only the barest spark of what would become our shared story. From tiny scattered bands huddled in caves and wind-beaten shelters, the ancestors of modern humanity emerged. They carried with them not just the skills to make tools or hunt game, but the hard-won instincts to cooperate, to adapt, to outthink a hostile world. These were people who had stared down extinction and refused to blink. Genetic studies confirm that their resilience echoes in us today. The reason our mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes appear so shockingly uniform is because they trace back to those few who survived the bottleneck. Everything you see in the modern world, from music to science, from skyscrapers to the devices in your hands, is the legacy of people who once scraped a living from a wasteland of ice, predators, poisons, and war. They did not thrive, they endured, and their endurance remade the world. Perhaps that is the most humbling truth of all. We were not born of peace, but of survival. We did not inherit an easy planet, but one that almost killed us. The last glacial maximum shows that our greatest strength has never been brute force alone, but an astonishing capacity to persist when everything collapses around us. That 0.1% carried forward the possibility of humanity, a thread so fragile it could have snapped at any moment, but somehow it held. And because it held, you are here to hear their story.